The next presentation is, the title is The Future of Work. Open is the secret weapon for survival in an era of relentless change. We can welcome Mr. Steven Rader from NASA, who is Deputy Director for the Center of Excellence for Collaborative Innovation. There is a dilemma facing organizations around innovation and skill shortages related to the relentless rate of change in technology. The stakes are high as organizations are finding traditional approaches are failing. This talk explores how open innovation, crowdsourcing in other words, is proving to be an effective tool for innovating and finding the latest technologies, and how NASA has been using these tools to great effect. This talk also examines how the shift to the freelance gig economy is changing and how organizations are able to access the talent and skills needed for this new pace of change. And one more thing. After the talk, Steven will be available for a short Q&A, so please feel free to type your questions during this session. So welcome on the stage. The stage is yours. Thank you.
Today on the future of work, and let's just dive right in. So first off, I work in NASA's Center of Excellence for Collaborative Innovation, which is an office that actually works across NASA and across the entire federal government to really help organizations and projects learn about crowdsourcing and what we call open innovation tools. And I'll talk a little bit more about that today. But first, I just want to start with where we are. We're at a time when things are changing, and they're not changing like they have before. Things have been changing for a long time, and technology's been gaining momentum, but we are actually in a period of time where the rate of change is starting to actually break traditional business models. And so when we look at that, what does it look like? Well, for one, we know we're all in this kind of technology explosion, but a lot of people don't realize that over the last 20 years, things have really changed. 90% of all scientists that have ever lived on the planet are alive today. And if you look at the curves for things like patent applications, we've gone from a few 100,000 a year up to past 3.5 million in 2017. The same with PhDs. Around the world, people have started becoming more wealthy, more education institutions have popped up, and now we're producing a larger number of scientists and engineers who are actually doing a ton of innovation. And a lot of that innovation is actually coming about in the form of what I call low-cost technology building blocks. And these are kind of accelerating the change even more. These are things like low-cost sensors and machine learning and additive manufacturing or 3D printing, blockchain, cheap robotics. And all of these kinds of technologies are kind of special because they're easy to access. Almost anyone can go learn about them easily and inexpensively. The tool sets are fairly cheap in most cases. And each one of these technologies applies to lots of industries. And so it's creating lots of innovation in lots of different domains. And that's resulting in this explosion of solutions that actually can help a lot of different areas. So just looking at additive manufacturing or 3D printing, that's being used to produce rocket motors, but also to build homes in the home building area, to produce jet engines. Even fabric and clothing is being reinvented with 3D printing. In the medical area, they're actually learning how to 3D print organs out of tissue. And then even food 3D printing. There are now restaurants that specialize in 3D printed food, and you can go buy a 3D printed a 3D food printer on Amazon. It's domain technologies, and that is the case with lots and lots of different technologies. And so what's happening is, with all of this innovation going on in each of these areas, we find that there's this great thing that there's technologies that every industry can start using and cross-pollinating and finding innovations that are mature in one industry that they can apply to the problems in theirs. But the con is that because this technology explosion is so big, and our world is so complex, and all of these domains are different and siloed in the way they talk to each other, it's actually very, very difficult to find the technologies and solutions that you need. You can't just Google the latest and greatest technologies and expect to find them, especially when it comes to competitive types of things. On top of all this, there's a lot going on with AI and automation that really is causing things to go even further, right? So a great example of this out of Kareem Lakhani's and Marco Citti's book, Competing in the Age of AI, is Ant Financial. So this is a new kind of company that's digitally native, that's using AI out of the box, that's collecting lots of information, and they're actually able to, that 310 is their loan strategy. 3 minutes for someone to fill out an application, 1 second to approve them or disapprove them for that loan, and 0 people involved. This company has 9,000 employees, and even though they service almost a billion, about 700 million people in China, they haven't grown. And compare that with 200,000 employees at Bank of America, servicing about 1/10 of that population. So really interesting kinds of technology models that we're having to deal with here, right? And so with all of this technology, organizations are having to innovate just to keep up with the pace so that their competitors don't find that innovation first and put them out of business, or a disruption comes along. And at the same time, it's difficult for organizations to find the skills and expertise. And just to demonstrate that, if you look on Amazon's kind of workplace website, they posted all of their jobs that they have, that they populate and show how they're filling those jobs. And if you notice, many of their top jobs, when you look closely, didn't even exist 9 or 10 years ago. So there's this entire area here where you can see the top jobs that they're actually getting didn't even exist before, and most universities aren't providing. And so there's this real skill gap that's going on because of what's going on with these really broad technologies like AI, machine learning, and software. So these are starting to break our traditional businesses. Businesses were really designed to where they would bring workforces in, they would work on one product for a long time, and yes, they had to innovate every so often, every few years, but they could concentrate on selling that product. But what we're finding is these days, even our most successful companies, if you look, the Fortune 500, right, is the most successful companies. If you look over the last 15 years, half of those companies have gone extinct. If you look at the average lifespan of companies, that same list shows that back in 1935, that was 90 years, and that's less than 20 years today. The time it takes for companies to actually go under is shortening, and it's because of this technology explosion. So now we have organizations that are increasingly having a high risk of remaining competitive and relevant, and yet they have to innovate. And so how do you do that? Not only are they having to do that in a time when technology is exploding, but they're having to do that in a time when the human workers and organizations and how they interact are changing drastically, right? The skills are hard to find, but also there are new shifts towards the freelance world. And so there's new platforms on the internet that have formed that are starting to gather communities together and find ways to efficiently match what those communities can provide to what people need. And they're starting to fold in lifelong learning, and they're starting to disrupt some of these models. So you're starting to see open innovation, which is kind of innovation and crowdsourced challenges designed to find those technologies and those technology solutions, and open talent, which is finding the people that have the skills that can help you. And all of these are kind of lumped into crowdsourcing, but this is more and more becoming something that we need. And in fact, at NASA, we're actually focused on using these tools. And these crowd platforms are starting to provide lower and lower friction in the matching and doing that at scale. So you can kind of think of it as like Uber is taking a bunch of people that have cars and matching them to a bunch of people that need rides, and doing that in really efficient ways with a lot of trust, right? So people will trust getting to someone's car. Same with Airbnb. Lots of people that have rooms to rent, a lot of people that need a place to stay, establishing that trust and then that efficiency of how to do that. And that's starting to happen with workers. So we're starting to get curated crowds. So these platforms will have people join their crowds. They'll often connect around a common passion. They'll have learning opportunities. They'll actually have opportunities to make some money sometimes. And then on the client side of this network, they're actually opening up and saying, look, these folks can do something. We're going to figure out how to actually take what they can do and translate it into something you as a company need, and do that with high trust and low friction. And you're finding that both in the open innovation area, like companies like Topcoder and GrabCAD and Tongle. These are all places where people with passion for, say, software in Topcoder's instance, or in design and engineering for GrabCAD, or video for Tongle, and they come together around that passion, and then those companies are able to provide that to other client companies in ways that actually are producing very great software and great commercials for TV. And so these are the open innovation platforms. You can see several others there, and there are tons of people in these crowds, and they're able to do things that are of high value. We've actually been working with this for almost 10 years, and we've done almost 500 projects at NASA. And one of the things we started noticing is that these open innovation crowdsourced challenges were yielding great solutions, but we are also noticing an intersection with this whole emerging workforce of gig workers and freelance workers. And that shift is becoming quite significant. And in fact, at HR Fest, that's what you guys are caring about, right? Is these shifts in the actual workforce. And what we're seeing is people are leaving traditional companies for these freelance workforce platforms and workforce lifestyle. And we're seeing, in fact, that they're leaving the regular workforce at like 3 times the rate and becoming freelancers than they are becoming regular employees. And in fact, last year, 41.5% of the average organization's total workforce was comprised of non-employee labor, which is nearly double what it was just 7 years ago. This is a big shift going on. And in fact, the predictions show that by 2027, there will actually be more freelancers than regular full-time employees. That's a huge shift. And I don't care where your organization is on this, you have to start to understand the differences in how you're going to react to this, because you're already seeing it, right? You can't find the right skills out in the workforce to hire them. And in fact, COVID is speeding all of this up, right? And so there's actually predictions that this will happen even faster. And when you start to look at these freelancers, and this is all from a study from Edelman Intelligence, you find that 2/3 are reporting making more money freelancing. And if you start to look at some of the overheads involved in freelance, in full-time employment, you start to understand the math behind that, and it's a global economy, right? Those two functions work together. You can also look, and I found this to be really interesting, when they ask freelancers, and these were full-time freelancers, how much money would it take for you to come back and work for a company and work for an organization? Half of them actually came back with the answer, there's no amount of money you can offer me where I will come back and take a traditional job. People they're kind of done with it, right? They like the agency. They like the fact that these platforms are providing them connection to global marketplaces of work, and that they can actually do the lifelong learning. If you think about that pace of change we talk about, that pace of change is the problem. It's not the automation, and it's not the machine learning, even though those are eliminating jobs and tasks. We've always adapted. The problem is the rate. People aren't able to upskill fast enough when they're owned by companies. When companies own the resource, right? You're recruited and retrained by HR professionals. Guess what? The average training is $1,000 per employee per year. And that's barely training anyone anything. And if you look at what's required in this new rapidly changing technology workspace, people have to be training. I actually met a lead freelancer, a top coder, and ask them, how much time do you spend actually learning about new technologies and new software so that you can put those to work in your freelance work? And he kind of floored me. He said, 60% of my time. That's a huge, now that's not the norm, right? But think about that for a second. 60% of your time learning versus almost none of your time learning in a traditional workplace. That's part of that difference. And in fact, you can actually see it in the data where they actually look and see that freelancers participate in skill-related education a lot more than regular non-freelancers. There's also some new ways that this upskilling and education is happening. And this is really fascinating because these platforms are starting to use machine learning and the capture of what I call digital exhaust. So they'll take their freelancers, and every time they enter something or perform a task, they're capturing detailed data about that work that's being done. They're capturing detailed data about the skills that that individual has, and then they're using that in machine learning to match them with tasks. But in addition to that, companies like this Paro.io, which is a finance and accounting freelance company in the US, they're actually using that machine learning to match the freelancer so that doing the task is possible, but it's going to be a stretch. And then they provide some extra resources so that by the time they get to the project, they're upskilled, they're actually smarter, and they're able to do more and do more complex work. If you think about that kind of upskilling, that lifelong learning, that's the future right there, where it's not about a course that's random, that comes at you, you know, once or twice a year, but rather that by doing that just-in-time type of training that keeps you going throughout these changes that are happening in technology. So this emerging workforce, if you look at it, is both on-demand and persistent. I can actually build a network of freelancers that I work with all the time, and I can build a team, and if one of them can't show up, I can go find somebody who's more on demand. It works both ways, and in fact, the more successful folks that use freelancing actually build networks and ecosystems of people they know and trust because it reduces that friction. They're available both globally and locally, right? So think about Uber for a second. Global community, global capacity, they bring a car to your door, right? Grunt workers all the way up to experienced experts. I've worked with people that are literally labeling data and require almost no skill, all the way up to people who used to be COOs and CEOs of companies who are all the way connected in those skills and can provide all sorts of expertise. There's lifelong learning to speed up that latest tech that we talked about. And then these workforce platforms are providing lower and lower friction. So think about the friction points like being able to trust a freelancer to not share proprietary data, or onboarding and provisioning someone into an IT system. That's what these platforms are getting really good at. They're starting to actually ask those questions and get structures in place so that literally you as a company can pick up the phone or send an email and say, hey, I need someone to do this complex task today or tomorrow, and that happens without a blink of an eye, without a lot of overhead, without a lot of forms filling out. And that's the kind of thing that we're seeing. And if you're in HR, that's what you're competing with, right? You're competing with platforms that are providing workers with a flexible workplace, providing them with a stable kind of flow of work that's global because it's global marketplaces and doesn't have the local ups and downs. They're providing them the tools to actually get work quickly, to make more money, all of those things. And we're kind of going through this flipping process where the industry used to be the stable place that everyone went, and now people are moving away from that. I'll just get off the page with, or off the stage with this. Open is really the future. People that are really still siloed and looking inward are not going to be around for much longer. And innovation, while that may have been this novelty that you had to have a little bit of investment in, actually has to take more of a focus in most companies, because the likelihood of you being undercut by someone who comes in is actually quite high. So you can kind of see that the gig workers, freelancing, and all of these platforms are increasing in capabilities. They're going to be able to provide high-performing teams. They're attracting people with passion and expertise and skills that you need and won't be able to hire. And they're finding that these open methods are really, really effective. Here's the bottom line. Doing nothing has a cost. If you don't learn about these trends and learn about what's going on and learn how to use these new tools and adjust, you really won't be here much longer as an organization. With that, I think there's actually a lot of great stuff going on in here. I encourage you to learn more about this. There are some resources if you're interested. Machine Platform Crowd is a great book. Competing in the Age of AI that I mentioned, and Gig Mindset by Paul Estes all have great information about all of this. Thank you very much for having me.
So Kuroska says, wow, very inspiring and frightening a bit regarding our own professional future. What would you say beyond lifelong learning? What skills, competencies, development we shall start in our for the future with? I would say everything that you can learn about these emerging technologies like AI, like additive, like blockchain, and even if that is not your focus, the more you learn about those things, there will be lots of jobs where you will have to understand those kinds of technologies and be very familiar with them. So a lot of people don't realize, especially in the data science and machine learning world, that the prerequisites are not an engineering degree or math, but rather simply statistics. So there's a lot of opportunity within the data science community, and I would say that would be a key area I would recommend in upskilling, because no matter who you are, the more you understand about what data science can do and how it's going to affect things in the future, the better off you'll be. So that's just one area. Also learning about platforms and about curated communities. Some of these new learning methods would also be very helpful. So I hope that helps. Let's see, Andres, I hope I'm saying that right. Whoops. How do you see the platforms developing in the next 5 to 10 years? Would we see more or differently organized platforms? I believe in building communities and see a future where there are many more freelancing platforms and co-working spaces. Absolutely. There are already something like 700 crowdsourcing platforms in various capacities in both the open innovation and open talent areas. I think what we'll start to see is the use of machine learning and the use of blockchain and some other things to actually facilitate kind of. So, for instance, assembling a well-functioning, high-performing team very, very rapidly, like overnight or in an hour, right? And being able to do that where that team is very tuned and matched in its skills, in the personalities of the team, in people that have had actually previous work experience together. And for problem solving, say you had a really big, emergency problem, these platforms could probably assemble 50 of those high-performing teams overnight to go work on that problem, right? And so that kind of capacity is going to kind of increase the ability of the innovation that those teams can do, because they can actually start to do more complex jobs. The other part is in that blockchain area, that ability to get things like background checks and pre-onboarding type of work done kind of as done beforehand. So there's a company in Switzerland that's actually working on something like this, where you get one background check that can be used across multiple firms. So the onboarding of a freelancer can literally be hours. You can find somebody with the right credentials, with the right background checks, and the right skills, and have them working on your team very, very rapidly with a high trust, right? Which is the key piece. I do think there's going to be more of these communities. That what we are seeing is the more successful communities aren't just kind of paywalls for labor, but rather communities where they bring workers together around a skill. like Tongle does with video, or like Top Coder does with data science, and that the community itself acts as a kind of catalyst for learning by doing. So those things that kind of mix the upskilling that allow you to not only learn something, but learn by doing, by participating in a challenge or actually working on a new project. There's a community called Current that's actually training salespeople, and it's using that training in a gamified way to actually provide sales while people are actually learning. So those kinds of new models in the platforms, I think, will evolve, and we'll see a lot of really interesting things. And I kind of see it as, if you think about what HR currently does inside of companies, you're seeing these platforms are going to take on kind of that role for workers in these platforms, right? So they'll be, people will gravitate to the platform that they get development, that they get kind of access to more and more benefits, where they get access to the jobs that are the most interesting. And that kind of meritocracy will start to bubble and make a difference. And we're hoping that a lot of these platforms will start to open up so that they're very accessible, not just for the best and the brightest, but provide a path for, you know, everyone, so that as automation starts to take existing jobs at every level, people can start to upskill. Let's see. Peter says, I was wondering how fast the trend it will apply in Hungary, considering fundamental cultural differences compared to the US, let's say. It's a really good question. I don't know that I can address Hungary personally, but I will say we get participation in these platforms from people at every country. When we do an open innovation challenge at NASA, literally we've done challenges where every single nation is represented. So while the companies in Hungary may not be using these services, the people of Hungary are engaged in these communities already. The whole idea of a side gig, right? The ability to be on one of these platforms and contribute and learn and make money as a side gig is happening more and more. And in fact, one of the things I think companies need to realize, regardless of where you are, is that it is very likely your employees are on various gig platforms. And if you start to recognize that that's actually a nice path for training, that they actually could bring benefit back into your organization by participating, you might actually be able to set up kind of guidelines where you say, hey, look, you can go participate in this side gig, which is very, very opposite to where we've been, right? Where it's all about loyalty and focus on the company. But if you think of it more as a training program, it is a free training program where they can actually be incentivized to make money. And if you put the guidelines that say, don't share our intellectual property, don't take more time than, you know, X amount of your workday, and focus it on skills that we need inside the company, you actually can parlay that into something that helps your company rather than something that is already happening and maybe not helping your organization, right? So there's ways that you can play with that. Was there anything you wanted to add to that, Gergely, on Hungary? And you have a much better perspective on the nation.
No, actually, I don't. I think I do want to do that. Actually, it's good that you answered the question of the audience. Actually, you know, I'm superfluous. That's the middle management. What happens?
I don't think you're very superfluous, but
at the end, I will have at least one question. But first, okay, go ahead and answer all the others.
Sure. Let's see. Let's see, Peroska, did I not answer her question? Where was your
question?
Oh, I did? Okay, good. Yeah, for Monica, I did answer that question. There are lots of different skills to go after, but understanding data science is probably the way to summarize that. What are the success factors of such teams or integration of those teams with traditional company orgs beyond trust in delivering and data safely? You know, one of the biggest problems that we faced at NASA and that we hear over and over is that culturally, workers resist people and ideas from the outside. So for instance, open innovation challenges, where we actually want to take a problem and see if the crowd has an answer. And often, more often, they actually have an answer that we never would have thought of and is very valuable. But what we found is early on, in fact, there's a Harvard Business School case study on kind of the workforce's rejection of that methodology. And it was really around the workers want to be the innovator, right? And so they like to innovate, they want to innovate, and oftentimes in organizations, we don't provide a great framework for them to do that. And if you then on top of that come in and say, hey, we want to take your problem that you were going to be the innovator for, and we're going to hand it out to the people outside it that you've never seen and don't have your qualifications because we think they can solve it, that gets a lot of pushback. And so we actually had to reframe the way we talk about open innovation as finding the better starting point for you to innovate. So we're not trying to go outside to get crowdsourcing to replace you, but rather to provide you a better search mechanism to find the latest and greatest technologies, to actually find all of the information that you need to go innovate. So we actually get a solution in from the crowd, but that's your starting point to actually do a better job of actually getting a better product or making that improvement that you need. But I would say the hardest problem is pushback within an organization. And I will say, the changes we're talking about here are global and they're large. And so organizations won't be able to hide from these. And this is why in the talk, I actually talk about traditional organizations are breaking, because within traditional organizations, it's very difficult to change people's mindsets about these things. And when you add on top of that the digital native problem of competing with companies that get it, right? I didn't tell the story in here, but when Amazon was going digital, the head of the company actually wrote a memo that said, everyone must write their software in a way that is open, that anyone can get to that data with the right privileges, and that it has to be architected that way no matter what, or you will be fired. And that was a huge kind of stake in the ground that said, look, everyone's got to change here. And if you don't, we're not going to actually be a digital native company. We won't be able to do the amazing things. And if you look at what Amazon's doing, it's all because they created that digital backbone that allows their AI to do what it does. And the successful companies in the future, that's what they're going to do. And a lot of the skills and how they're going to do that is related to that. And that's one of the reasons the open talent piece is so important, because companies can't simply hire that anymore. You can't hire all the data scientists you need directly, because they're in such high demand. Every industry is going to need them. So you're going to need a much more flexible way to think about that. Okay, I went on for a little bit there. Let's see if I can come back here. I'm not sure how to say Senji. How do you deal with corporate data protection? I get that question a lot. We have talked a lot about finding freelancers, engineers for our project for a few times, but we are always dismiss the ideas because we need to give out our code. And of course, in R&D, it's much feared to get out initial R&D. So there's two pieces to this. One is the innovation piece and one is the freelance piece, but they really both kind of are addressed the same way. And that is to say, these platforms have that question every time a company comes to them, and they have developed methods and answers for that. It's not the same in every company. Some companies have vetted members of their community, that they have just vetted them as much as you have vetted your employees, sometimes more. There are places you can actually get military cleared people, and they can sign NDAs, right? And so you can get the same legal protections there as well. A lot of times when you're running a challenge, some of the methods they use will actually be this kind of anonymizing of the task and making it so that you don't really know what you're working with. There's a great example that I use from the US where an organization posted on Topcoder a challenge that was, how do I track a single buffalo in Yellowstone National Park, which is this national park in the US, using only tourists' Facebook uploads, right? So only the pictures that tourists are taking and scraping those off the internet. And someone came up with an algorithm that could do that. But the real purpose of that was by the CIA to detect Russians in Crimea. And it worked really well for that. So there are ways you can tune the problem to where it doesn't, you know, people think they're working on a video game, but they're working on an algorithm, or they're working on something, but it's this science problem that really contributes to some bigger problem. It takes a little bit of work sometimes, but the payoff is fairly significant. And what Diane Finkhausen from GE, she used to run GE's general or their innovation program. She was on a panel with me once, and someone asked that question about, yes, but won't we give away our intellectual property, and isn't there all this problem? And she said, that is the single biggest excuse for companies to not use this that is invalid. And people throw it up as a smokescreen because they don't want to change, and they fear it, right? And so I would say management needs to realize that has been handled, and there are ways to deal with that. And it does take work, but it is possible. Thank you for that question. Andras, I wish I knew how to speak your language. Wow, thank you, Stephen. I'm blown away. Huge player, blockchain, close to blockchain. That, yeah, blockchain is going to be really interesting, as it's going to kind of allow for the new digital resume, which I didn't talk a lot about. But what these companies are doing that's really very similar to what HR does, but they're doing it better in most cases, they are gathering the digital exhaust from all of these workers. So on that PAR-OIO example, I talked to their CEO, and I asked, how much data are you gathering from your workers, these folks that are doing tasks? He said, every keystroke. And they're not using all of that yet, but they know that the machine learning is going to gain ability, so that they'll be able to analyze projects and how well they were done, and how fast and how efficiently, and what tools are used. But then from the personnel side, they can tell you someone's performance at a level that is just so much more detailed than kind of the CV resume method we use, right, within organizations. That digital exhaust is going to actually translate into a very deep resume that's probably going to be a blockchain-based kind of resume that you can port around portions of that or summaries of that. But that is a very different world where you can find exactly who you need, and you can draw on more just than what your job title is, right? If someone has a hobby in blockchain or programming, and they're an analyst over here, you had no idea. But as we start to get these richer data repositories, then you can actually draw on and let the machine learning task you with, or match you with people that can be really effective. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the questions are slowly over. You get a lot of positive comments, so I hope you see that. And I can only, express big thanks. But before that, I also have a last question.
Sure.
A little bit reflecting on the day-to-day. So, you know, what you are telling is such a nice word. I love to be in your word. But it's a word built on trust. Mm-hmm. It's a word built on people being open. And my question is, a lot of people do not have trust in institutions or in technology or in a lot of things. And the other thing is that what happens to, how can you build that trust, like really build, and how can you let those people also participate who are not open?
Right. I think there's a couple of things that are running here that are very almost counterintuitive, right? For instance, automation is taking jobs, but it's also creating jobs, right? And so this, we're seeing this shift to the gig economy where people are feeling like it is a much less secure world and a worse world for workers. But when I look at it, I see a world where people can pursue their passions more, where organizations no longer own them, and they actually have the flexibility to then learn more about what they're passionate about, more about what they're good at, and kind of live. It kind of becomes an untethered career that is developed more focused on the worker and less on the employee, because the employee becomes multiple, right? The trust piece is really interesting because blockchain has really introduced, and it's not just blockchain, there's other technologies here, but has really introduced this something that you know, an immutable record where you can, if we start to use this in the right way, I actually see a path where this could become kind of the cornerstone of trust. So imagine third-party kind of trust brokers that would keep your record, but you own it, right? But their job is to make sure that that remains pure. And some of the technology is already there to do that. Blockchain allows for read-only, so people can't necessarily copy information and use it. And so imagine for a second you go do a task, you hand off an API to that record, and it then dumps all of your experience, all of the things that you need out of that digital exhaust we talked about, but you own it as a person. Now you can't touch it, because if you could modify it, then no trust would be there, right? But these kind of digital trust mechanisms can actually start to provide real ways to actually record what you're doing, which also provides you a way, if you're using that kind of digital in all of your work, as a way to prove that you're not sharing sensitive information. So that the actual recording of data and the possibility of kind of having that in a trust container, if you will, that is reliable and that people start to understand, that actually starts to open up some really interesting possibilities, because in the proving out of it, you can say, look, you can trust me not only while I sign an NDA, but I will let you monitor my activity within certain parameters over the next 3 years to ensure that I don't share your secret. Nobody's doing that level of trust today, right? But you could do that with the new digital world. At least you can start to, right? Now, some of that you might not want to do very often, but you can start to see that there's a path. And in fact, I think because we will need something like this for a portable reputation to go between repositories or between freelance platforms, once you get something like this, it can actually be a path to reclaiming privacy, because it actually provides a mechanism that we've never had for protecting and owning information. And so there may be a nice path there, but that's a great question. So thanks.
Thank you, Steve. And actually, thank you very, very much for you being here. Just to remind all the audience, we had already a video, an interview with you. I believe it was in April or something like that. That was a great, great conversation. Watched more than 20,000 times since.
Oh,
so
wow.
for the audience, we are going to repost it, and then you can watch it. And you have read all the comments, but still a huge, huge thank you. It's a word everybody, I think, at least those who are attending, definitely the HR Fest crowd, we do want to live in that world. And it's great to have you as a kind of, I don't know, somebody showing us that it is possible.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me. This was great. And it's an amazing event. So thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye. See you next time.
Bye-bye.